Hello, this is Roland. Welcome. Today I want to continue to talk about becoming perfected in God's light. I want to share something very, very lovely with you. This is from Emanuel Swedenborg, and he wrote a book called Heavenly Secrets. And in the book, he talks about the inner meaning, the hidden meaning of the Bible. And he begins with Genesis. And he begins in Genesis 1, where it said, "In the beginning, God created heaven and earth." And Swedenborg says the word beginning is used for the very earliest times. The prophets frequently called them the days of old. The beginning includes the first period of regeneration. He talks about how, when you read the story of creation, how it also talks about the process of how a human being is reborn and becomes spiritual and celestial. From natural to spiritual to celestial. Swedenborg, somewhere, he said that a human being is a heaven in least form. The interior of a human being is like heaven, Okay? Or it can become like a hell. Do you know anyone who had hell in them? See? And that's what happens to us if we go the wrong way. But here's the right way. He says the beginning includes the first period of regeneration too, as that is when people are being born anew and receiving life. Because of this, regeneration itself is called our new creation. Almost everywhere in the prophetic books, the words creating, forming, and making stand for regeneration, though with differences. In Isaiah, for example, and then he talks about how it's used in the Old Testament. Heaven or the sky symbolizes the inner self. Remember? Swedenborg said that the innermost of a human is like a heaven in least form. Heaven or the sky symbolizes the inner self, and the earth, before regeneration occurs, symbolizes the outer self, as it may be seen below. Genesis chapter 1, verse 2. Now, I read what it said and then what Swedenborg had to say about it. "And the earth was void and emptiness, and there was darkness on the face of the abyss. And the Spirit of God was constantly moving on the face of the water." Swedenborg describes what this means in terms of regeneration or rebirth for the human being. Before regeneration, a person is called the void, empty earth, and also soil in which no seed of goodness or truth has been planted. Void refers to an absence of goodness, and empty to an absence of truth. The result is darkness, in which a person is oblivious to or ignorant of anything having to do with faith in the Lord, and consequently with a spiritual or heavenly life. The Lord portrays such a person, and then he talks about how the person is portrayed in the prophet Jeremiah. Well, let me continue. The face of the abyss means our cravings and the falsities these give rise to. We are wholly made up of cravings and falsities and wholly surrounded by them. Because no ray of light is in us, we are like an abyss or something disorganized and dim. Many passages in the Word also call such people abysses and sea depths, which are drained, that is, devastated, before a person is regenerated. An individual of this type observed from heaven looks like a dark mass with no life at all in it. I'm chomping at the bit here to add my 2 cents worth, but let me continue with Emanuel Swedenborg. The same words involve an individual's overall spiritual devastation, a preliminary step to regeneration. Before we can learn what is true and be affected by what is good, the things that stand in the way and resist have to be put aside. The old self must die before the new self can be conceived. The Spirit of God stands for the Lord's mercy, which is portrayed as moving constantly, like a hen brooding over her eggs. What is being brooded over in this instance is what the Lord stores away in us, which throughout the Word is called a remnant. It is also a knowledge of truth and goodness, which can never emerge into the light of day until our outer nature has been devastated. Such knowledge is here called the face of the water. Okay? So, in a simplified way, I could say that we are first of the earth. That's what I often say. We are first of the earth and later of the Spirit. When we come into the world, we're actually very close to God. For most people, that's the closest they will ever be to God. And you can see in the little child the brightness. And you can see how Swedenborg could say that the human being is a heaven in least form. Okay? Nevertheless, it is fitting and proper that the little child first grow as a little child and run and jump and play and discover wonderful things in God's great green earth and grow to maturity. Okay? That's very proper. But then as an adult, at some point, for some people, not for everyone, but for some people, a second stage of growth begins to take place. You know how a caterpillar lives, first part of its life as a caterpillar, and then it goes into a cocoon, and then it emerges as a beautiful butterfly. That's the second part of life. Well, for we humans, for some of us, that's the same thing. And it's called rebirth or regeneration. That's what Swedenborg is talking about here. So he says that when it says in the Bible, the Spirit of God moves constantly over the water. It's like a hen brooding over her eggs. What is being brooded over in this instance is what the Lord stores away in us, which throughout the Word is called a remnant. It is a knowledge of truth and goodness, which can never emerge into the light of day until our outer nature has been devastated. Such knowledge is here called the face of the water. Now he goes on to Genesis chapter 1, verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. The first step is taken when we begin to realize that goodness and truth are something transcendent. When we are conceived anew, however, we first begin to be aware that our good is not good. And as we advance further into the light, it dawns on us that the Lord exists and that He is goodness and truth itself. We need to know, too, that the Lord is goodness itself, or life, and truth itself, or light, and consequently that nothing good or true exists that does not come from Him. So we all have that sense, don't we? That, when we do something good, we see that it's really not good. We can see by the effects that it has on people. It enslaves them, or they rebel against it, or it doesn't help them. Some people never realize that, but some of us do. We see that there's a certain falsity in our goodness, in our acts of goodness. And when we speak truth, there's a certain shallowness in it, a certain something impure, something prideful. We're saying it for effect or to puff ourselves up, or we're talking about something that we don't really understand, or we're trying to manipulate, or there's something that's not quite right about it. Okay? We sense that. And we're troubled by it, but there's nothing we can do about it. So our good is not really good. You see that, don't you, when you see how some people help their kids too much and all they do is spoil them or ruin them, or the kids rebel. You see how government gives all kinds of handouts and how it doesn't help the people. It makes them worse off because their goodness is not really goodness. Okay. And then it says here, everything was made by him and nothing was made without him. In him was life, and the life was the light of humankind. But the light appears in the darkness. He was the true light that shines on every person coming into the world. And God saw the light, and it was good, and God made a distinction between light and darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. The light is said to be good because it is from the Lord, who is goodness itself. The darkness is whatever looked like light to us before our new conception and birth, because we saw evil as good and falsity as truth, but it is actually darkness, our lingering sense of self-sufficiency. Genesis 1, verse 5. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day. From this we now see that what evening and morning mean. Evening is every preliminary stage, because such stages are marked by shadow, or by falsity and an absence of faith. Morning is all later stages, because these are marked by light, or by truth and religious knowledge. Evening stands in general for everything that is of our own, while morning stands for everything of the Lord's. Okay? So, in a nutshell, in very simplified terms, I could say that we are born as little egos and we grow up to become big egos. Okay? And if we're lucky, we have a decent childhood and we're not tempted too much. And we grow up to be big natural egos. Okay? And then we learn, and we go to school, we get a job, we learn a trade, we get married, we have kids as big natural egos. But if the process continues, which then becomes a process of corruption, then we become big nasty egos. Okay? And a lot of us are big nasty egos parading as nice egos. On the surface, we pretend to be nice, and we may look nice, but underneath we're filled with resentment and hostility and selfishness and jealousy and judgment. You see what I mean? So once again, you see that our good is not really good. And our truth is not really truth. When we speak pompous words, they're shallow, they're empty. We don't know the whole story. It's based on word knowledge and memory knowledge. It doesn't have understanding in it. Okay? So what you need is understanding. Well, at a certain point, when the person begins to be regenerated, to be reborn, okay, then God has implants. See, He implants. He gives something of Himself, something good, okay, and we know it as light, as conscience, the light from God, which is good. And then we begin to. Then we see our own falsity. We see what we thought was good was not really good. Then we see our own falsity and the errors that we made in our falsity and what we thought was good. You see, we see that. And of course, we're sad about what we see. And we begin to let go of it. We let go of our resentments and our judgments and our false, pompous words. And we begin to lay those down. Okay? We lay down that ego, those things that sustained our pride in darkness. Now we see them in the light. God has sent His light. So in the light we see those. And we begin to let them go. And now a new life comes into us, a new light. comes into us from God, okay? Which is truth itself and goodness itself. And now we see things in the light of truth and in the light of goodness, okay? And that light imparts something to us. Like a morning when there are no clouds and because of brightness, because of the rain. He says, since evening is when there is no faith, and morning is when there is faith, the Lord's coming into the world is called morning. The period in which he came, being a time of no faith, is called evening. Okay? Morning in the word is similarly taken to mean every coming of the Lord, so that it is a word for being created anew. Okay? So I'm continuing. And God said, now this is Genesis 1:6. This is the verse that Swedenborg then gives the inner meaning of. And God said, let there be an expanse in the middle of the waters, and let it exist to make a distinction among the waters, in the waters. The next step occurs after the Spirit of God, the Lord's mercy. We also, I'm just saying this as an aside, we also call it grace. Brings out into daylight the knowledge of truth and goodness, and provides the first glimmering that the Lord exists, and that he is goodness and truth itself, and that nothing is good or true except what comes from him. See, that's something that you then realize. See, before, you didn't have faith. See, some people pretend to have faith. What do they have? Well, they have knowledge, something they read, or something somebody said, and they repeat it, okay? And they drum up emotions, animal emotions, okay? But they don't really have faith. See, God gives you faith. See, when he enters your life with his light, then you see your wrongs a little at a time, okay? You see your wrongs, and you're sorry about what you see. You realize you can't change yourself. You regret what you see about yourself, and you yearn to be different. It's the Lord's light. But in his light, then you also see that he exists. You sense that he's there. And you sense that he doesn't judge you, and that he forgives you, but he just wants you to see your errors so you can be better. You sense somehow. Okay? That's the first glimmerings. And then you know that God exists. That it's a gift. God gives you light, and then your ability to realize, not to have memorized or have read or have studied or have heard someone say, but you see. You see, you wordlessly, you just see. Just realize that he exists, that he is goodness, and then nothing is good or true except what comes from him. The Spirit of God then makes a distinction between the inner and the outer being, and between the religious knowledge we possess in our inner selves and the secular knowledge belonging to our outer selves. The inner self is called the expanse. He's talking about the word that was used in Genesis. The knowledge in the inner self is called the waters over the expanse. And the facts belonging to the outer self are called the waters under the expanse. Before we are reborn, we do not know even that an inner being exists, let alone what it is, imagining there is no difference between the two selves. This is because we are absorbed by bodily and worldly interests, and merge the concerns of the inner being with those interests. Out of distinct and separate planes, we make one dim, confused whole. So, it's something I've talked about a lot, and I talk a lot about it in recent videos that I've made, and that is that when we meditate, with like the meditation that I have, you learn to separate from thought. See, because what happens is, like Swedenborg says here, the concerns of the world. Our consciousness merges or joins with fuses to our animal mind, our animal brain, our animal body. We're fused to it because we're overwhelmed by the sights and sounds and sensations and emotions, and we identify totally with our body. And we don't even know there's an inner, because our consciousness, see, your consciousness is supposed to delicately hover over the mind, subconscious, and the body, to rule, to rule, see, to influence, to provide a proper authority, a loving or good authority to the mind and body. But what has happened is that your consciousness fused with the sensual, the sensuous, and then was overwhelmed by it. See, and then you fell into it. See, you fell into your imagination, into thoughts, into worries. See, and sensations, and you hid there, and you said something was wrong, but you didn't know what it was. Well, once you begin to meditate, and I think God also makes this possible. He makes his light strong enough. He turns the dimmer up a little bit. He makes his light strong enough. See, and he somehow holds you separate. He holds you separate. So you can observe what you didn't ever want to see before, what you couldn't see before. Now you can see it. That's what we're talking about now. Okay. Remember the beautiful story, A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens, remember? Where there was Ebenezer Scrooge, and he was not so different from us, was he? He was greedy, selfish, okay, pompous on the outside, but inferior in the inside, mean-spirited, judging other people, angry, resentful. See, just like most everybody underneath, okay? But then that angel came and took him and showed him. See, showed him what would happen if he didn't change. Well, similarly, when in God's light, you not so much see what will happen, but you see what you were. You see your resentments, and before you thought they were fine, and your selfishness says, and your judgments of others. You thought it was okay. All of that was okay. Now you see something wrong with it in God's light, and you're able to separate from it instead of submerging and joining and merging with it. You see? Well, I think I better stop now. It's been 24 minutes. Very beautiful. I'm using my Kindle here. This is my Kindle Paperwhite. And I have Volume 1 of the Heavenly Secrets. Emanuel Swedenborg's Heavenly Secrets. I have it on here. It's very nice. Okay? I hope you enjoy this little talk. Okay?